Have you ever sensed that someone was quietly destroying themselves, while believing they were doing the right thing? Some mistakes don't make noise, but they silently drain wisdom and dismantle one's inner worth from within. Not all foolish people are loud. In fact, the ones who seem to know it all are often the ones repeating subtle mistakes. Mistakes a truly wise person would never allow themselves to make again. You don't need to call someone a fool. Just watch the patterns they repeat, or the ones you repeat, and ask yourself, is this a sign of wisdom, or the beginning of silent self-destruction? Stoic philosophy never teaches us to look down on others. It teaches us to observe, self-reflect, and grow. Because often, ignorance isn't about what you don't know, it's about refusing to relearn, to change, and to listen to yourself. In this journey, we'll explore 8 unmistakable signs of a person who's lacking true wisdom. Each one is a wake-up call, not to judge others, but to evaluate ourselves. From seemingly harmless traits like a closed mind, to the more deceptive trap of chasing appearances over substance, you'll begin to see that wisdom isn't a destination. It's the way you respond to every moment life throws at you. Are you ready? Let's dive into the 8 signs that reveal when a person, no matter how capable, might still be quietly limiting themselves. 1. A closed mind, the fortress of stagnation. There is no prison more confining than a closed mind. It's built not with iron bars, but with fear, pride, and stubbornness, layer upon layer of self-imposed limitation. A closed mind doesn't scream. It doesn't rage. It simply refuses to consider, to question, to evolve. And that quiet refusal kills progress, not just for the individual, but for everyone around them. The foolish cling to what's familiar, mistaking comfort for correctness. They believe that the way things have always been is the way things must always be. And anything that challenges that illusion is labeled a threat. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Growth does not happen in comfort zones. It begins at the edge of discomfort, where you must let go of what you think you know. I once worked alongside a man named Mark, a department manager who had spent over a decade perfecting his routines. In his world, tradition was king, innovation, a nuisance. When a young employee suggested a more efficient system to help the team stay competitive, Mark shut it down instantly. "We've done it this way for years," he scoffed, "and it's always worked." But the results told a different story. His team lagged behind, struggling to meet deadlines, bleeding potential while other departments soared. Still, Mark stood firm, blaming everyone but himself, his staff, the market, even luck. Never once did he look inward. Never once did he consider that the real enemy was not change, but his refusal to embrace it. Stoicism teaches us that wisdom begins with the humility to admit we don't know everything. The wise are not those who cling to answers, but those who stay open to questions. They understand that knowledge is never final. Life evolves, and we must evolve with it. The closed mind, in contrast, is stuck in a loop, recycling the same ideas, reacting to the world with outdated tools, mistaking familiarity for mastery. But comfort is not mastery. It is inertia disguised as stability. And if you're not growing, you're decaying. A closed mind doesn't only hinder success, it fractures relationships, limits creativity, and erodes trust. Imagine working for someone who refuses to listen, Imagine trying to collaborate with a person who treats every suggestion as an attack. The damage ripples outward. It silences innovation, kills morale, and teaches people to stop trying. That is the hidden cost of mental rigidity. The Stoics believed that the wise person is like water, fluid, adaptable, unafraid of change. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "If someone can prove me wrong, and show me my mistake or where I've gone astray, I will gladly change." That is not weakness. That is strength rooted in self-awareness. To say, "I was wrong," is not to admit defeat, it's to unlock growth. Because only when we drop the shield of false certainty can we actually begin to learn. If you find even a trace of this rigidity within yourself, don't panic, don't judge, but don't ignore it either. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly listened without preparing a rebuttal? When was the last time you changed your mind, not because you were forced to, but because you learned something new? The answers to those questions reveal more about your character than any title or degree ever will. A closed mind builds walls. A curious mind opens doors. Which one do you want to live behind? And remember this: it's not too late to tear down the fortress. All it takes is the courage to let in one new idea, and the humility to know it might be better than your old one. That's where wisdom begins. That's where freedom lives. 2. Constant blaming, the shield that becomes a cage. Blaming others is easy. It's the perfect defense mechanism, quick, convenient, and emotionally satisfying. But here's the truth most people avoid. Every time you point a finger outward, you strip yourself of the power to grow. Constant blaming isn't just a sign of immaturity or arrogance. It's a clear indicator of intellectual stagnation. It creates an illusion of control while locking you in a reality where you learn nothing, improve nothing, and change nothing. It's the shield people use to protect their ego. But that same shield becomes the bars of the mental cage they live in. They think they're dodging responsibility. What they're really doing is rejecting transformation. I once worked with someone named Lisa, brilliant on paper, impressive in meetings, full of potential. She was in charge of a high-stakes project, organizing a national conference. But when the event failed due to poor attendance, Lisa didn't hesitate. She blamed the marketing team for not promoting it well enough. She blamed the venue for being too small. She blamed the audience for not showing up. But when we dug deeper, we found that the real issue was Lisa's failure to send the event details in time. The delay disrupted the entire timeline, and yet she couldn't see it, or maybe she refused to. Even when the evidence was clear, she continued to deflect, and eventually, her team lost trust in her. Leadership was taken from her hands, not because she failed, but because she refused to admit she had. This is the tragedy of blame. It offers temporary relief, but it always leads to long-term damage. Relationships suffer, teams break down, reputations erode, but worst of all, the person blaming never gets better. They remain frozen in a version of themselves that's allergic to growth. Stoic philosophy teaches us that accepting responsibility is one of the highest acts of strength. Epictetus wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." When you react with blame, you shut down the opportunity to reflect, learn, and evolve. When you respond with ownership, you begin to take control of your own story. There's something noble about owning your mistakes, not because failure is glorious, but because it's real. It's part of being human. When we avoid responsibility, we deny our own humanity. We create a version of ourselves so fragile, it can't withstand the weight of a lesson. But when we accept the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, we build resilience, credibility, and character. Growth doesn't come from being right all the time. It comes from having the courage to say, I messed up, I could have done better, and I will. That is the moment transformation begins. If you ever find yourself in a pattern of pointing fingers, pause. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding by blaming someone else? Is there a truth I'm afraid to face? Sometimes, the hardest thing to admit is that we played a part in our own pain. But once you do, something powerful happens. You stop being a victim of circumstance and start becoming the author of your own future. That shift is everything. Blaming is a habit, but like any habit, it can be broken. The Stoics remind us that we are not defined by our past reactions. We are shaped by the awareness we bring into the present. And awareness starts with brutal honesty. Not with others, with yourself. If you want to be wiser, stronger, and more trusted by those around you, start by removing the word they from your excuses. Replace it with I. It's not they failed me. It's I missed something. It's not they didn't support me. It's I need to communicate better. That shift in language changes everything, because it stops the cycle of blame and starts the process of becoming. At the end of the day, blaming might protect your pride, but it will cost you your progress. And you had to decide, do you want to feel safe? Or do you want to grow? One path leads to stagnation, the other, to wisdom. Choose wisely. 3. Arrogance over humility. The illusion that blocks growth. There's a certain kind of arrogance that wears the disguise of intelligence. It talks loud, interrupts often, and is desperate to be seen as the smartest person in every room. But real intelligence doesn't need to prove itself. It listens, it observes, it learns. Arrogance, on the other hand, is a performance, loud, fragile, and deeply insecure. It feeds on validation but starves the soul. The moment you feel the need to constantly assert your superiority, you've already stepped off the path of wisdom. Arrogance blinds you not just to others, but to the very lessons that life tries to teach you. And that blindness isn't harmless, it's destructive. I remember a man named Michael, brilliant resume, commanding presence, a manager at a major corporation. In every meeting, he would talk over people, ridicule suggestions, and insist that his ideas were flawless. He didn't listen, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. He believed that being right mattered more than being respectful. But when his team's major project collapsed, he didn't see it coming. He blamed the team, criticized their incompetence, and doubled down on his vision. What he failed to realize was this: the failure didn't come from his ideas, it came from his inability to listen, adapt, and collaborate. His arrogance had built a wall so high that even truth couldn't reach him. That's what arrogance does, it isolates you. It convinces you that you already know everything worth knowing. But the truth is, no matter how smart you think you are, life will humble you. It might come through a mistake you didn't expect, or a lesson you thought you'd already mastered. And in those moments, humility isn't weakness, it's salvation. It's what keeps the door open for growth. Humility allows us to admit we're wrong, to listen deeply, to be students again, And the wisest people in history were exactly that, eternal students. They didn't fear being corrected. They welcomed it, because they knew that ego is the enemy of mastery. Stoic philosophy reminds us that humility is the beginning of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful emperors in history, wrote daily reminders to himself not to let pride poison his clarity. If a man who ruled an empire could remind himself to stay grounded, what excuse do we have? Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less. It means placing truth above ego, learning above performance, and growth above validation. Arrogance may win arguments, but humility wins respect. It earns trust. It inspires others. While arrogance seeks applause, humility creates impact. And here's the truth: no one ever learned anything while talking. Growth lives in the quiet moments, when you step back, open your ears, and choose curiosity over certainty. If you ever catch yourself trying to dominate, trying to prove, trying to impress, pause. Ask yourself, am I really adding value? Or am I just trying to feel superior? That question reveals everything, because at the core of every arrogant action is fear. The fear of being seen as ordinary, of not being admired, of not being enough. But humility doesn't chase admiration. It builds character, and character is what remains when the applause stops. The real leaders, the real teachers, the real masters, they don't shout to be heard. They don't belittle others to elevate themselves. They listen, they ask questions, they acknowledge their flaws. And that's why people follow them, not out of fear, but out of respect. If you want to be truly wise, then drop the mask. Stop performing. Be honest about what you don't know. Admit when someone else has a better idea. Praise without envy. Learn without ego. That's what separates the wise from the loud. Arrogance may look powerful on the surface, but underneath, it's just fear in disguise. Humility, though quieter, holds the power to transform everything: your relationships, your leadership, your impact, and ultimately, your life. 4. Lack of empathy, the silent blindness of the heart. Empathy isn't just a feeling, it's a form of wisdom. And when it's missing, something fundamental breaks, not only in how we treat others, but in how we see the world. A person who lacks empathy may be smart, skilled, even charming on the surface, but without the ability to connect to another human being's pain or perspective, they drift through life detached, unaware of the emotional destruction left in their wake. It's not always intentional. Often, it's ignorance disguised as efficiency or honesty. But regardless of intention, the result is the same: people feel unheard, dismissed, and hurt by someone who doesn't even notice what they've done. There was once a man named Paul, a co-worker known for his bluntness and obsession with deadlines. He wasn't evil, just incredibly disconnected. When a teammate, Susan, missed a delivery because her child was in the hospital, Paul didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't offer help. He simply stood up in a meeting and criticized her in front of everyone, saying, "We can't afford delays. Excuses don't keep projects moving." At that moment, what hurt Susan most wasn't the stress of her personal life. It was the feeling that her struggle didn't matter to her own team. Months later, life flipped. Paul's mother fell critically ill, and suddenly, he found himself drowning in the same chaos Susan had faced. For the first time, he understood what it meant to feel overwhelmed and unseen. That experience cracked something open in him. And through that pain, empathy was born. This is what a lack of empathy does. It blinds us to what truly matters. It convinces us that results are more important than relationships. That logic is more valuable than compassion. But Stoic philosophy challenges that illusion. True wisdom, the kind that lasts and leads, isn't found in cold analysis, it's rooted in human connection. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize?" That simple reflection turns judgment into understanding. When you lack empathy, you not only harm others, you limit yourself. You rob yourself of the emotional depth needed to build trust, to lead effectively, to love deeply. Relationships become transactional. Conversations lose meaning. And slowly, people withdraw from you, not because they hate you, but because they feel invisible in your presence. That's the true cost, an emotional isolation that intelligence alone cannot fix. Empathy is not weakness. It doesn't make you soft. It makes you human. It gives you the power to respond instead of react, to listen instead of assume, to support instead of shame. It doesn't mean agreeing with everything or tolerating toxic behavior. It means pausing to consider what someone else might be carrying before you rush to judgment. It's a small moment of grace that can shift an entire relationship. If you find that people around you often seem guarded, defensive, or emotionally distant, ask yourself, am I making them feel safe enough to be vulnerable? Do I listen with the intent to understand, or just to reply? Those questions are mirrors, and while the answers may sting, they also guide you towards something better. The Stoics weren't detached monks. They believed in connection. They believed that we were all pieces of the same whole, that what isn't good for the hive can't be good for the bee. Empathy is how we honor that unity. It's how we break through the walls of ego and start building bridges of understanding, even with those we don't fully agree with. To live without empathy is to live half a life, efficient, maybe, but empty. To live with empathy is to access something far greater than success. You access meaning. You access depth. You become someone who doesn't just speak well, but someone whose presence makes others feel seen, heard, and valued. And that kind of presence? It's unforgettable. Train your mind to be sharp. Yes, build your skills. Pursue your goals. But don't forget to bring your heart along the way. Because in the end, it's not how much you know, it's how deeply you understand that will define the kind of person you truly are. 5. Fear of change. The invisible chain that holds you back. There's a quiet kind of fear that doesn't scream or panic. It whispers. It disguises itself as logic, as caution, as being realistic. But underneath that mask, it's pure resistance. Fear of change isn't just hesitation, it's a slow surrender to stagnation. It's what keeps people stuck in the same patterns, the same job they hate, the same toxic relationship, the same version of themselves. Year after year, while the world spins forward, they remain frozen, gripping onto comfort like a life raft, not realizing that comfort is also the cage. They tell themselves they're being stable, when in truth, they're being left behind. I once knew a man named Michael. He'd lived in the same neighborhood for over 40 years. Knew every face, every street corner. He wasn't just attached to the place, he was fused to it. When his children urged him to move closer to them, to a city with better health care, a vibrant community, and more opportunity. He resisted fiercely. "This is home," he'd say. "Why fix what isn't broken?" But the truth was, things were breaking. His old friends were moving away. The shops he loved were shutting down. The area was changing, even if he refused to. Eventually, isolation set in. The familiar world he clung to was dissolving around him. Only then did he make the move, and what he found shocked him. A new rhythm of life. A deeper connection with his family. A sense of renewal he didn't think he was capable of. The thing he feared the most had opened a door he didn't know he needed. This is what fear of change does. It robs you of chapters you were meant to live. It convinces you that what you have now is the best you'll ever get. It turns "what if" into a threat instead of a possibility. But Stoic philosophy reminds us that everything is in motion. Life is flux. Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice. For it is not the same river. And he is not the same man." Change isn't the enemy. Refusing to flow with it, that's the real danger. When you fear change, you start negotiating with your dreams. You tell yourself to wait, that the timing isn't right, that next year will be better. But time doesn't pause for your fear. And the more you delay, the heavier the regret becomes. People don't look back and wish they had resisted more. They wish they had dared sooner. They wish they had listened to the quiet inner voice that said, "There's more for you out there." Change doesn't always come with a grand announcement. Sometimes it knocks softly, an opportunity you almost dismiss, a conversation that nudges your curiosity, a discomfort that keeps returning. If you're not paying attention, you'll miss it, or worse, you'll shut it down out of habit. That's how lives shrink, not because people are incapable, but because they're unwilling. Unwilling to be uncomfortable. Unwilling to start again. Unwilling to believe there's something greater on the other side of fear. Stoicism teaches us not to cling, not to outcomes, not to roles, not even to the self we think we are. Because everything is temporary. Everything is evolving. The goal isn't to resist the tide. The goal is to learn how to swim with it, with grace and courage. When you accept change as part of the process, not a threat, but a teacher, you stop reacting in fear and start responding with intention. That's when life starts expanding again. If your life feels stuck, if the days blur together and your spirit feels dim, ask yourself, what change have I been resisting? What truth have I been too afraid to face? Because behind that resistance might be the very thing that brings you back to life. You don't have to leap off a cliff, but you do have to move. One choice, one step, one moment of courage can shift everything. The fear will be there. That's normal. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let it dictate your future. Don't let comfort become your prison. Don't let routine convince you that you're safe when you're really stuck. The future doesn't wait. Growth doesn't come wrapped in certainty. It comes in the form of risk, vulnerability, and change. It's not the change itself that transforms you. It's who you become because you chose to face it. That's where strength is built. That's where your real story begins. 6. Talking more than listening. When noise replaces wisdom, there's a kind of foolishness that doesn't look like ignorance. It looks like confidence. It walks into the room loudly, dominates the conversation, interrupts without hesitation, and mistakes volume for value. But beneath the surface, this constant need to speak, to be heard, to impress, it's not strength. It's insecurity in disguise. And the more a person talks without listening, the more they disconnect from reality, from others, and eventually, from themselves. People who talk more than they listen rarely realize what they're missing. But everyone around them does. Slowly, others stop contributing. They shrink back. They tune out. Because why bother speaking when your voice is treated like background noise? I remember a man named John, a father of 3. Successful in business, admired in his community, but inside his own home, he ruled every dinner table conversation. His kids would come in from school, excited to share their stories, their ideas, their little victories, but within minutes, John would take over, sharing his opinions, retelling old achievements, offering unsolicited lectures. It wasn't that he didn't care. He genuinely believed he was teaching, guiding, being a good father. But what he didn't see was the slow erosion of connection. His children stopped trying to share. His wife grew quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because he never gave them space to say it. What John failed to understand is that relationships don't thrive on talking. They thrive on presence, and presence means listening. Stoic philosophy reminds us that wisdom begins with silence. Epictetus famously said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, to listen twice as much as we speak." Listening is not a passive act. It is active, intentional, and deeply powerful. It requires humility. The humility to believe that someone else might have something important to say. And when you truly listen, you give others more than just your attention. You give them dignity. You tell them, you matter. You are seen. You are heard. People who talk endlessly without listening often miss the most important details. They miss emotional cues, signs of distress, moments of vulnerability. They miss the chance to connect. They miss the opportunity to learn. Because no matter how much knowledge you think you have, it is useless if you can't hear the truths unfolding in the room around you. Listening expands your awareness. It sharpens your perception. It reveals what ego tries to cover up. If you find yourself constantly preparing your next sentence while someone else is still speaking, pause. Ask yourself, am I truly listening? Or am I just waiting for my turn to talk? That simple shift in awareness can transform every interaction. It creates space for honesty, for depth, for mutual respect. And in that space, relationships are rebuilt. Insights are gained, and growth begins. Talking more than listening may feel powerful in the moment, but its long-term effects are isolation, misunderstanding, and regret. The loudest person in the room may grab attention, but the one who listens earns trust. And trust is the true currency of connection. In families, in friendships, in leadership, people don't remember what you said nearly as much as they remember how you made them feel. Listening makes people feel valued. It creates the kind of presence that lingers long after the words fade. If you want to be wise, learn to say less and hear more. Make eye contact. Let silence do its work. Ask questions, not to steer the conversation back to yourself, but to understand someone else's world. Because when you listen deeply, without judgment or interruption, people open up in ways you've never seen. You gain access not just to their words, but to their soul. And in that sacred space, real influence is born. Talking is easy, listening is rare, but in a world where everyone is shouting, the one who listens becomes unforgettable. Don't chase attention. Earn respect. Don't aim to impress. Aim to understand, because in the end, it's not how loudly you spoke that people remember. It's how deeply you heard them, and how powerfully you made them feel understood. That's the legacy of a listener. That's the mark of wisdom. 7. Refusing to reflect. The silence that stalls your growth. One of the most dangerous habits a person can develop is never stopping to ask, why did I do that? When you live without reflection, you drift, you react to life. Instead of shaping it, you move through your days making decisions, forming opinions, repeating patterns. Yet you never pause long enough to see if those patterns are building you or breaking you. That is the hallmark of a mind asleep. The foolish resist reflection because it forces them to confront uncomfortable truths. They don't want to face their contradictions, their mistakes, their deeper fears, but by avoiding that discomfort, they trap themselves in a shallow version of who they could be. They keep living the same day over and over, mistaking movement for progress. There's something haunting about someone who's always in motion but never changes. They're constantly chasing distractions, work, noise, conversations, endless scrolling, because silence makes them nervous. Silence might reveal what they're trying to avoid. Yet that same silence is the very space where wisdom begins. Reflection isn't weakness. It's not indulgence. It's clarity. It's the process of holding up a mirror, not to your face, but to your character. And without that mirror, how can you ever truly grow? Stoic philosophy places deep value on self-examination. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, kept a journal, not to document his victories, but to hold himself accountable. He wrote to himself, for himself, challenging his assumptions, correcting his behaviors, reminding himself of the man he aspired to be. That practice, daily reflection, isn't ancient fluff. It's a discipline, and in today's chaotic world, it's more necessary than ever. Because if you're not intentionally guiding your own evolution, chances are, you're repeating old habits in new costumes. People who never reflect tend to blame others, repeat poor choices, and wonder why their life feels stuck. They don't realize that the problem isn't the world, it's their unwillingness to look inward. They think they're being strong by brushing things off, by moving on. But unexamined behavior always circles back. It shows up in broken relationships, in lost time, in emotional exhaustion, until one day they realize, too late, that everything they ran from was rooted in the version of themselves they never paused to question. If you want to live wisely, start by slowing down, not forever, just long enough to ask yourself, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Am I becoming the person I truly respect, or just performing for the approval of others? These aren't soft questions. They're powerful. They cut through ego, excuse, and distraction, and they unlock something rare in this world: self-awareness. When you refuse to reflect, you become a stranger to your own potential. You lose touch with the quiet compass that knows what truly matters. But when you embrace reflection, you begin to lead yourself. You become intentional. You start recognizing your emotional triggers, your unconscious biases, your unhealthy cycles. And once you see them, you can change them. That's how evolution begins, not in noise, but in stillness, in asking, in writing, in listening to your own soul. Journaling isn't just for writers. It's for thinkers. It's a tool to track your mind the way an athlete tracks their body. To notice when you're slipping, when you're drifting, when you're not showing up as your best. And even if you don't write it down, reflect in thought. In solitude, give your mind space to process what your mouth said and your actions revealed. That space is sacred. It's where accountability grows. It's where the noise of the world fades, and the truth of who you are rises to the surface. Refusing to reflect is refusing to grow. It's choosing stagnation dressed as strength. But you weren't made to stay the same. You were built for progress. Not perfection, but movement, awareness, alignment. And that begins when you finally stop, look inward, and ask yourself the hard questions you've been avoiding. If you can be brave enough to do that, not once, but often, you will become someone rare, someone aware, someone grounded, and most of all, someone capable of real change. Because growth doesn't start in the world around you. It starts in the mirror you're willing to face. 8. Chasing appearances over substance. The illusion that steals your depth. In today's world, it's easy to confuse visibility with value. Social media rewards the loudest voice, the flashiest image, the carefully curated highlight reel. But what many fail to see is this. Chasing appearances over substance is one of the clearest signs of a shallow mind. A foolish person isn't always someone who lacks intelligence. They're often someone who trades authenticity for applause. They don't want to be wise. They want to look wise. They don't want to build character. They want to be seen wearing the costume of it. And this obsession with image becomes a trap. One that drains the very core of who they could become. You see it everywhere. People consumed with being impressive instead of being impactful. They want titles, not responsibilities. Praise, not discipline. The perfect quote on their profile. But none of it lived in their daily actions. They'd rather be called successful than do the hard work that success actually requires. And here's the tragedy. In their race to be noticed, they forget to become someone worth noticing. Their self-worth becomes dependent on perception. Their values shift with the audience. And beneath the polished surface, there's no real foundation, just noise. Just performance. I once knew a man who built his entire identity around being admired. Every word he spoke was calculated. Every decision he made was filtered through the question, how will this make me look? He wore the right clothes, used all the buzzwords, even dabbled in philosophy to sound enlightened. But in private, he was insecure, impatient, constantly chasing validation. And when life hit hard, when he faced failure, criticism, discomfort, everything cracked. Because image can't protect you from reality. And when you haven't done the inner work, no outer image will save you. Stoic philosophy cuts through this illusion like a blade. It teaches that real value has nothing to do with how you appear. It's about how you live when no one is watching. It's the principles you stand by, the integrity you uphold, the strength you build in silence. Marcus Aurelius didn't care about being remembered as great. He cared about living rightly. Epictetus didn't chase applause, he chased truth. That's what separates substance from show. One builds quietly over time. The other burns fast and fades quicker. When you focus only on appearances, you live for the eyes of others. You become a mirror, reflecting what you think the world wants, never discovering what you truly are. And in the process, you exhaust yourself trying to meet expectations you didn't create. True fulfillment doesn't come from being seen, it comes from being aligned. It comes from waking up and knowing you're becoming someone your younger self would respect. Someone whose life means something, even if no one claps for it. The person who values substance over appearance invests in what can't be taken away: character, discipline, kindness, purpose. They aren't distracted by applause, because they're too busy building something that matters. They choose patience over popularity, truth over trends. They understand that depth isn't glamorous, but it's what carries you when everything else falls away. If you've been caught in the cycle of performance, step back, ask yourself, am I building a life that feels real, or one that just looks good from the outside? Because that question could change everything. You're not here to impress. You're here to grow. You're here to serve, to love, to evolve, not to entertain an invisible audience. And once you stop chasing appearance, you free yourself to live with meaning. In the end, the world forgets the glitter, but it remembers the gravity of a life well lived. Not the image, but the essence. Not the performance, but the principle. And that's what Stoicism teaches us: to live rooted in truth, not in theatrics, to pursue substance, not spectacle. Because when the lights fade, when the applause stops, and all that's left is you, only what's real will remain. And if you've built your life on that, you'll never feel empty again. The path from foolishness to wisdom starts within. Now that we've walked through these 8 powerful signs, not just of foolishness, but of missed potential, it's time to turn the mirror inward. This video was never about labeling others. It's about awakening something inside you. Because at one point or another, all of us have closed our minds. All of us have blamed others, spoken too much, or feared change. But the difference lies in what we do next. The wise don't deny their flaws. They face them, they learn from them, they grow through them. Stoic wisdom isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about choosing humility over ego, growth over appearance, and self-reflection over blind reaction. These 8 signs are not punishments, they're invitations. To go deeper, to live better, to become the kind of person whose strength isn't loud, but undeniable. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how others see you. It's about who you are when no one's watching. If even one of these truths struck a chord with you, good. That's the beginning of transformation. Don't run from it. Lean in. Journal your thoughts. Revisit the parts of yourself you've ignored. Then start making quiet, powerful changes. That's how real wisdom is born, not in noise, but in the stillness of your own awareness. If this video inspired you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe for more life-changing insights rooted in Stoic philosophy. Your journey toward deeper strength and clarity is just getting started, and we'll be right here, walking that road with you.